All right, welcome everyone. It's 1 o'clock. I see a few people are joining as I talk. So I'll go ahead and just get started with a little bit of the housekeeping, and then we'll move into our webinar for today. Part of the Making Conservation Happen webinar series, first Fridays of the month. And my name is Douglas Meyer. I'm the strategy advisor to the Ocean Project. And this series is made possible by the generous support of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. So I want to make sure to acknowledge them. I still see a few more people clicking in here as we get started. So maybe this is a cue to skip by my picture as quickly as possible and get to our agenda. Our agenda for today, we're really lucky to have Greg Zimmerman, Senior Fellow and Communications Director with Wyss Campaign for Nature, along with Amy Kenny, the Executive Director of the National Ocean Protection Coalition, on our webinar today. And the topic of our webinar is going to be about the 30 by 30 campaign, which I've been just incredibly impressed by the way, thanks to folks like Greg and Amy, this campaign is really gaining traction. Not only within, but well beyond the aquarium and zoo community. So we wanted to talk today about some of the ways we're hearing, like what's the latest on the campaign, to hear it straight from the source, and also to talk a little bit about and allow you all to start signing on, because there's going to be some opportunities going forward for aquariums and zoos to really make a difference. All right, it looks like we've got a nice quorum of people here at this point, so I'll keep going. Just as a little bit of refresher for those who may not have been involved along the way, obviously there's been a little bit of, this is growing within and beyond the zoo and aquarium community, as I mentioned earlier, and within that community, AZA, of course, had Dr. Enrique Sala of National Geographic keynote at the last annual conference. If you all did not have a chance to hear his presentation, it is available online. I highly recommend it. About 20 members of AZA, with whom we're collaborating in this effort directly, signed on in support of the Global Deal for Nature. Some of those logos are represented in a little black box you see. And 8 members, I believe these were all belonging to the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, ACP, with whom we're also collaborating, along with AZA itself, signed on to a proposal, a letter of support for the proposal, I should say, in the Senate, the 30 by 30 resolution to save nature. And then 30 by 30 was the theme, my little friend, the sea turtle there, was the theme for World Oceans Day this year. And with that, we were able to generate about 25,000 signatures. And that's really important because one of the things we'll hear about is there are a couple roles that aquariums and zoos can really play to help the movement overall. And one of them is really broadening this out, letting more people know about 30 by 30, this push to protect 30% of our land and ocean by the year 2030. And then the other is a really unique and positive role that we've seen played by aquariums and zoos in engaging and informing policymakers, both sharing the opinions of visitors and also your own expertise. So with that, let me, you're here not to hear more from me, but to hear from our speakers. So I'd like to pass it over to Greg, but before I do so, I wanted to just take a quick poll here of who we have on the line and just get a sense for how active you all have been in 30 by 30 at this juncture. So if you could take a minute and just, whether you're fully engaged or just getting started, we'd love to just have a sense for our panelists. Okay, we're seeing some of those votes come in. We're also seeing a few more people, joining the call. All right, great. Well, this is giving me a little bit of a sense here. It looks like we have a little less than half have expressed some, or working at a zoo aquarium that's expressed some support for the concept, which is great, about 40%. About 30% not yet active. A couple that have actually signed on to the letter mentioned. A couple who are going to figure it out, and that's great. Well, we'll have some resources for you if you want some more information, but I'm going to put one ask out now at the risk of sounding like I'm, like this is a sales pitch, but I guess it a little bit is. In the chat function, if you know that you're at an aquarium or zoo that's already interested in getting involved in 30 by 30, at least at the point of wanting to know and stay in touch as the campaign evolves, please put your organization, your name and your email address in the chat. And that we're going to just start to create a little group here so that when new resources come out, you're aware of it. We also know that there's going to be some realities of certain places where we need to engage policymakers, where you can really make a big difference. So we'd love to get a sense for who's in our little community here of zoos and aquariums that are especially interested. So please post those in the chat. If you prefer, you can also, thank you, Katie, for the first one to join, do that. And if you're not the best point of contact for your aquarium and zoo, either put that in or send me an email later. All right, great. Well, let me actually go ahead and pass over the microphone to Greg Zimmerman with the Wyss Campaign for Nature. And really, you'll see that website that's underneath Greg's name, and that's really become the hub for where this community is gathering. So Greg, let me pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Can you hear me all right? I'm coming through?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks to the Ocean Project also for putting this webinar together and for inviting me and Amy to talk about 30 by 30. I'm thrilled to be with you all today to discuss this growing effort to address the nature crisis by accelerating the pace and scale of conservation in the US. Doug, if you just want to go to the first slide there. Perfect. So my plan for the next few minutes is to provide a relatively high overview of the effort to protect 30% in the US by the end of this decade, including some of the scientific justification and some basic principles for policymaking around these issues. And then I'll just wrap up with a handful of opportunities for the aquariums and zoos to lend your expertise and voices to this important effort, sort of building upon what Doug's already said here at the top. If you go to the next slide. So first, to start with some of the ugly news about the state of nature, which I'm sure all of you as practitioners are well aware of. So according to a comprehensive global assessment by more than 400 scientists, as part of a UN panel that was released last year, 1 million species are at risk of extinction globally, and many of those within the next few decades, unless transformational changes are made to how we manage biodiversity and protect lands and oceans. That same report found that 3/4 of the planet's lands and 2/3 of its oceans have been heavily modified by humans. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, the story here in the US isn't a whole lot better. So the map on this slide is from some research that was produced by Conservation Science Partners, which shows that 24 million acres of natural area has been lost since the turn of the 21st century. This is terrestrial. We're losing a football field worth of natural area every 30 seconds to human development in the United States. If you could go to the next slide. So what's the solution? Obviously, we're all here to, the previous slide. Yep. The headline on the slides, yeah, the goal. Right there, perfect, thank you. Obviously, we're all here to talk 30 by 30. So what scientists are telling us is that one of the best strategies to address the crisis facing nature is to rapidly accelerate the speed at which we're protecting nature. And over the last year or so, the scientific community has really begun to coalesce around a goal to protect at least 30% of the planet on land and at sea by 2030, ultimately working to fulfill the goal that's been laid out by E.O. Wilson to protect half the Earth in order to save the whole. So in the international space, I think you guys have maybe heard about this on a previous webinar, parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity are considering adopting a global 30 by 30 target. And those negotiations are sort of speeding along and going pretty well. And a final deal will be settled in China right now, scheduled for next May. And many nations are lining up behind 30 by 30 goals, from Canada to Costa Rica to the European Union. Many sort of traditional US allies and governments are supporting 30 by 30 targets to recover biodiversity in the world's nature. Next slide. So here in the US, 30 by 30 goals are ambitious, certainly ambitious, but also attainable. What this slide shows is that currently about 12% of US lands and 23% of our oceans are protected, though the very large majority of our protected oceans lie in the remote Pacific. All that said, there's a great deal of opportunity in the US. Currently about 40% of US lands have been substantially modified by human activity. So the flip side of that is the good news. It means 60% of our lands are largely in natural condition or could plausibly be restored to a natural condition. And the US actually ranks as one of the top 5 countries in the world with the total amount of wilderness quality lands that remains. So there's a great deal of opportunity. Next slide. There are opportunities to pursue 30 by 30 goals at every level of government, from towns and counties through state legislatures and at the federal level. And the fact of the matter is that addressing the nature crisis and solving this problem is going to take collective action at every level of government. So this effort early on has been led, and as Doug alluded to, by 2 folks in Congress, Senator Tom Udall and Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who introduced a resolution early this year, late last year, that really lays out 5 principles that any good 30 by 30 policy should embody. Those 5 principles are laid out in this slide. So that has to support locally led conservation efforts. Any 30 by 30 goal needs to work towards a more equitable and inclusive vision for nature. It of course has to honor the sovereignty of tribal nations. It has to support private land conservations and recognize the important contributions that private landowners make to managing biodiversity. And then of course, and this one's listed last, but it should probably be first, it has to be guided by science. Next slide. So just to talk a little bit about some of the momentum that's been gaining around 30 by 30 here in the US. So we've seen broad support for 30 by 30 goals by most candidates who ran for president this year. And it is included in candidate Biden's and Vice President Biden's climate platform. We've seen the 30 by 30 goals feature prominently in a number of reports that have been generated by the US House of Representatives, including by the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. There's a long section laying out how accelerating the pace of protected area conservation, both on land and at sea, is critically important to addressing the climate crisis and nature-based solutions, and specifically setting a 30 by 30 target will be important to meeting our climate goals. We've seen bills and resolutions that have been introduced and passed, introduced at the state level. There's a bill in California and South Carolina. And then we've also seen a number of counties, cities, and tribal governments support resolutions saying that they're behind a 30 by 30 agenda. And then of course, there's been amazing support by grassroots and NGOs, by a number of zoos and aquariums, and some of your organizations that are on the phone right now, or on the Zoom call right now. There was a sign-on letter that I know Amy helped organize, that currently has 180 organizations and businesses that support the 30 by 30 resolution. So again, very, very strong grassroots support. And I think just finally, and I think Doug is going to discuss in a little bit more detail about how aquariums and zoos can tap into and really complement the 30 by 30 effort and make an important contribution. I think, of course, your institutions play an incredibly unique role in educating the broader public. You have unique access to the public and a group of folks who've really self-selected and expressed interest in the natural world. So by meeting folks where they are, by educating them about nature loss, the benefits of an ambitious conservation agenda, what a 30 by 30 policy means, and by using, I guess, your individual and collective voices to support conservation ambition, I really think you all can help move the needle and help generate a broad base of public support for an ambitious conservation agenda. So with that, I've just one last slide. I would encourage all of you to visit the website, which is natureamerica.org. It sort of lays out in more detail what we're doing. I would encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Protect30x30. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any point with any questions at my email address. And with that, I will hand it over to Amy.
Thanks, Greg. And let me just interject here a quick second before we get to Amy. And just to let you know that working with Greg and Amy, as well as AZA and ACP, we've prepared a little introductory overview to 30 by 30 that's specific to those roles Greg was mentioned as to where aquariums and zoos can really add maximum value to this larger movement that's really taking off. So, and we do have in that an example from a pilot project some of you may have heard of, some of you on the line may have helped us with a special shout out to the New England Aquarium that did some great work testing 30 by 30 messaging and got some phenomenal results from visitors for doing so, as well as New York Aquarium, which took their results down to Congress and had some great results there. But let me pass with that over. We are the Ocean Project, of course, so I would be remiss not to have a little extra word on what's happening with our oceans. And Amy, let me pass to you on that.
Great. Well, thank you, Douglas. Thanks to the Ocean Project for having me today. I think Greg covered a lot of territory, so I don't have a whole lot to add. I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the work that we're doing in the ocean space on 30 by 30. So again, I'm Amy Kenny. I run the National Ocean Protection Coalition, and we're a coalition of more than 60 organizations who care about protecting places in the ocean. So our focus has really been on marine protected areas, and initially came together around the creation of some new marine national monuments. And then the last few years have really been focused on defending those places. But that work has been really rooted in strong partnerships with aquariums. So with the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, both New England Aquarium and Mystic Aquarium were founding partners. Their scientists put together the case for protecting those places, and of course engaged the public through exhibits and events around generating support for these places. So as both Douglas and Greg said already, I think there's a lot of a huge role for zoos and aquariums in this space. The momentum really is building. Greg laid out some key milestones in that movement building, and of course zoos and aquariums have that important role both for outreach and education. And in the ocean space, we've seen them have a really important role in terms of the science, and seen as really trusted sources for this type of information. So at the National Ocean Protection Coalition, we've been trying to provide some resources that are a little bit more ocean specific, and have prepared, toolkits and resources and messaging. And I know Douglas plans to share some more information with all of you. But if anyone is interested in learning more or engaging in some of the work we're doing around ocean protection, we would love to hear from you. Douglas can be a great conduit for that. And just really excited to continue the discussion and see the engagement of the zoo and aquarium community. So thanks again for having me. Douglas, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Amy. And just as a quick recap, at the risk again of sounding like it's an infomercial, those who are interested, act now. Put your name and organization in the chat so that we know how to stay in touch with you going forward. I mean, there's been a lot percolating around 30 by 30 within our zoo and aquarium community. Again, working collaboratively with AZA and ACP, and thanks to the Moore Foundation, we have an opportunity to help serve as a liaison, gather materials, share interests, et cetera. But we need to know who out there would like to be involved or like to learn more. So as Amy mentioned, we'll have some more resources to circulate. Right now, I did want to devote the next few minutes to any questions you all have about the latest status with 30 by 30, other opportunities. Thank you, Felicia. I see another one come in the chat. And other opportunities or interests that you have. So if anybody has any questions for our panelists, please start sending those in. And I'll actually kick us off with the first question here, which is, given everything going on in the world, when do we think resolutions like this will be really coming forward for serious consideration, whether at the state or national level? And that sounds like a question for you, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, the resolution in Congress, obviously there's a lot of organizing going into it, and it's a very important, piece of messaging. I don't expect that that's a resolution that'll, certainly get taken up by this Senate. That doesn't mean that it's not incredibly important. I think it's really, it's setting the tone for what ambition looks like, and it allows for policymakers to begin developing policies that flow from that. And the resolution is worth reading through, and it sort of sets some goals for what 30 by 30 should, a 30 by 30 agenda should represent. And then, the hard work is going to be the, both the legislative efforts and the administrative efforts to conserve, protect, and restore more places. And, we're already seeing movement at the federal level on that. Of course, the Great American Outdoors Act passed, on a bipartisan basis and was signed by President Trump in the last month, which was a huge conservation victory, and will provide critical resources to protect more places. And, this is really a bipartisan issue. So I expect, hopefully we'll see a lot more success. We are starting to see interest at the state level, and a number of states looking at resolutions and bills to establish task forces to implement a 30 by 30 agenda. There's a bill in South Carolina to do just that. I think, like with everything else, the COVID crisis has obviously really impacted state budgets, the functioning of state legislatures, and so hopefully as things return to normal, states will be able to kind of look at this and begin moving policy. I expect that they will.
Great, thanks, Greg. And Amy, this seems like the next question is more for you. When we talk about protection or marine protected areas, there have been a couple different figures thrown around. At what point do we look at, or how does NOPC or NOPC look at what qualifies as a protected area for the sake of the 30 by 30 goal?
Great question, thank you. So in the ocean space, we are looking at stronger protections. So there's a lot of terminology differences out there about marine protected areas. They come in many shapes and sizes and levels of protection. And when you look at the science and what the scientists recommend, the stronger protections produce the outcomes that we need for both biodiversity and climate and the nature crisis. So those are higher to fully protected areas. And basically what that translates to is, full protection is, really minimal activity, no destructive human activity. And highly protected areas would prohibit industrial scale commercial activities and other destructive human activities, but would allow for recreation and subsistence use. So what the science is telling us is that in the ocean space, we need these strongly protected areas to be able to achieve the outcomes we need to protect nature. That doesn't mean that other protected areas aren't important, and there are a lot of benefits and achieving other goals, but with respect to 30 by 30, we really are looking at those stronger levels of protection to produce the outcomes we need for nature.
Thanks, Amy. Uh, One other question that came in earlier, which is for examples for ways that zoos and aquariums can participate. Maybe I should take that one. What we've seen before is actually some really good success with relatively small engagements. And I think the key has been talking to, for example, visitors or online folks about what is happening with 30 by 30, how they can get involved, and then also documenting that support. And that's one of the keys that's been able, groups like New York Aquarium, Mystic, New England have done really well, is when you can document visitor interest. It gives you a nice platform from which to talk with policymakers. Greg, I don't know if you have some specific examples when it comes to helping, or Greg or Amy, helping to reach policymakers, ways you've seen zoos and aquariums be especially helpful.
Yeah. I mean, obviously moving legislation at the federal level, requires majority of Congress to support it. And you guys are out in zoos and aquariums are in communities. And so, being able to host lawmakers and elected officials, obviously provide that educational component with a little bit of, with an advocacy or policy ask, I think can be really powerful. And so that's one way, certainly, as there's policy moving that that your institution supports, being able to engage directly with those offices can really help move the needle.
Great, thanks, Greg. And I think one of the key things maybe is that there's going to be a lot of opportunities at a lot of different levels that you can choose, a different zoo or aquarium can choose that suit your particular level of interest, and also the needs of the larger movement. So it's more of a conversation than a one-size-fits-all type thing. If there are additional questions, please do send those in. I actually have one more here that came in. How are NOAA or NERA, N-E-R-R-A, involved? I don't know if Greg or Amy, you have an answer to that question.
So just so I'm clear, NOAA as in the federal agency? I'm not sure I know what NERA is.
Yes, NOAA is in the federal agency.
Yeah, so the NOAA, the federal agency, in terms of like 30 by 30 specifically and directly, aren't involved. I mean, NOAA has a role in managing our national marine sanctuaries and our marine national monuments and other protected areas in our national system of MPAs. There's actually a Marine Protected Areas Center that keeps the statistics for what areas are protected, where are they, what kind of protections there are, and they produce some really good reports and information about protected areas in the United States. So, at this point, they are kind of managing and monitoring and enforcing protected areas that exist. And we hope that the agencies are more involved if this national goal is adopted, and that there would be direction to federal agencies to engage in kind of strategies and places to be protected in the future. But at this point, they don't have a direct role in 30 by 30, but we hope they do soon.
And I apologize, I think I'm fluent in Washingtonianisms, but National Estuarine Research Reserve System.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, a similar answer for the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. Those are kind of a form of protected areas, but in terms of their direct engagement on 30 by 30 at this moment, I would say it's not a direct role, but that is certainly a tool or a place that protected areas currently exist and could be expanded in the future.
Great. Well, I know we're running up to the end of time. My little flashback to Welcome Back, Kotter there. The next steps are, if your zoo or aquarium is already supportive of 30 by 30, you're the point of contact, or you know who it is. Again, please put that in the chat so we know how to reach you going forward. We will be sending around a follow-up email, especially for those who, you're a little, like we had about a third of you had said, we're not really yet engaged yet. This toolkit will be coming forward that kind of gives an overview with particular relevance to the roles that zoos and aquariums can play. you can always reach out to me directly. Just drop me an email. And during the annual conference, there will be a roundtable discussion about 30 by 30, where we'd really love to be hearing and really have that be a discussion. You know, what are people interested in doing? How is this progressing? Things of that nature. So mark your calendars for this September 16th at 12:15, and that's 12:15 Eastern. And that really, I think, concludes things for today, unless anyone has any final comments. I am always excited when we get to end something right on time. But anything else, just drop me a line, or Greg and Amy both provided their contact information as well. All right. Well, it looks like we got some great contacts in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we look forward to staying in touch as this really promising movement continues to move forward, thanks in part to the good work zoos and aquariums are doing. So thanks, everyone, and especially to our hosts, and we'll talk to you on our next webinar, first Friday of next month. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.